With the United Federation of Planets growing at an ever-increasing rate, and the first Federation Klingon war devastating its fleet, Starfleet Command would offer contracts to private companies to fill in the gaps. And the SSC would run with this opportunity, reinventing an old class, renaming it the DY-750 class, to fulfill all the Federation's needs. But what do we know about this unusual class? Well, today we'll find out. Hello and welcome to another episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon, a Star Trek web series that dives into the history of any given topic using beta canon sources and my own imagination to fill in the gaps. In today's episode, we're taking a look at the DY-750 class as first seen in the Strategic Space Command model kit released by AMT in 1968. This video is a different one entirely, as this class was not part of the Star Trek universe until fandom made it so with a clever reskin. This model was introduced in 1968 in an attempt to cash in on the Star Trek craze of the 1960s. AMT even hired the TOS Enterprise designer Matt Jeffries himself to create this starship, but the model ended up being a complete financial flop. Dedicated Trek fans, however, refused to let the design die, and began to convert them into a more Trek-like design, eventually ending up with what is now known as the DY-750 class. As a result, however, there is no real history for this class, and so I've made one up, which I hope falls in line with my previous TOS-era videos and that you'll all enjoy. Of course, because this video is entirely my own fanfiction for the design, all information relayed should pretty much be taken with a grain of stardust, and only considered a little bit of Star Trek fun. And so, with all that out of the way, let's begin. The mid-23rd century had been a devastating time for the Federation. The Federation Klingon War of 2256 had left Starfleet Command severely depleted. 1/3 of its fleet had been completely destroyed during the conflict, while a further third of its fleet had been severely damaged and barely functioning at all. And this made the Federation Council extremely nervous. Starfleet Command had already put in place construction and repair schedules and a timeline for when its fleet would be back to full strength. But unfortunately, even with its best projections, this meant that the fleet would continue to be operating at a reduced strength for at least another decade. Member worlds were appalled by this, feeling their territory was vulnerable to the Federation's enemies, who just might decide to take advantage of this situation. Coming back quickly with a new plan for the fleet, Starfleet Command would make the decision to convert several of its own transport and cargo starship designs into tactical and patrol vessels to protect Federation worlds and assets during the interim, which seemed to allay the Federation Council's fears for the time being. Of course, this meant that Starfleet Command now had a new problem, that being that suddenly they had no cargo or transport fleet to speak of. Left with very few options, Starfleet Command put out the call for private companies to fill the slack, offering several lucrative deals to any company that could help out. And one of those private companies, Strategic Star Command Incorporated, would come through with flying colors. Strategic Star Command had existed for over a century. Being mainly a cargo fleet of a smattering of older starships, no one really expected this tiny company to become one of the leading and biggest contracted companies Starfleet would ever deal with. Strategic Star Command's story really began to unfold in the early 2240s, with the unexpected death of its then owner Marcus Willoughby. Passing his company down the family line as had been done, Strategic Star Command would see Willoughby's twin daughters Amanda and Eris Willoughby take up the reins. A bit of an eccentric pair, the Willoughby twins decided that they wanted to expand their company, but with very little resources available to them, they had to come up with an inexpensive way to do so. History has lost the details on how exactly the twins ended up deciding to purchase and then convert older starships from Starfleet's own decommissioned shipyards. but by the early 2250s, Strategic Star Command had bought a fleet of these non-operational vessels, some of which were centuries old. Using their long-established relationships throughout the Federation, the Willoughby twins would assemble their own design team, the likes of which no one had ever seen before. And these designers would be set the task of converting and refitting these old starships into new top-of-the-line functional vessels, and secretly the DY-750 class would be born. A small starship design by today's standards and only 2 decks tall, the DY-750 class was designed to be operated by 6 crew members. A heavily modified version of the old DY-700 class, this class would see several new and unique innovations that would quickly make it the talk of the Alpha and Beta quadrants. Since this design had not originally included a warp drive, its designers had to come up with a way not only to get the class to a faster-than-light velocity, but also to make it fast enough to be a viable means of transport throughout the Federation. The solution they came up with was as simple as it was elegant. Utilizing once again older warp cores and Bussard collectors bought from decommissioned facilities, they would simply attach these Bussards and coils to the outer hull in a never-before-seen open-concept warp nacelle design, and after working out all the bugs, the DY-750 class would end up having a cruising speed of warp factor 6, and an emergency speed of warp factor 6.5. Due to this class's size, it would not be well armed, the designers banking on its speed and proximity to other starships for protection. However, the DY-750 class did have 2 single-phaser emitter banks and limited shield capabilities. A large single cargo bay situated in the aft section of Deck 1 would provide this class with all its storage needs. This cargo bay also contained a large bay door over top of it, allowing the DY-750 class to effectively use this area as a shuttle bay of sorts. Also included in this design was a single modified 4-person transporter unit. Using their connections at the Erickson Transporter Institute, the Willoughby twins would have that company design a transporter system with an expandable transporter buffer. This meant that although the transporter of this class might have been small, it had the capability of transporting 16 persons at a time, while simultaneously also being able to transport large cargo units in and out of its cargo bay via another specially designed site-to-site transporter component. Deck 2 of the DY-750 class would contain the vessel's transport accommodations. Though cramped by today's standards, these bunk facilities were actually quite comfortable, with each containing full access to an extensive library of entertainment. These quarters would not contain their own lavatories, however, with passengers required to share these outside facilities. A single centrally located mess hall and recreation center would allow for passengers to congregate and interact during their voyage, and guests were often encouraged to participate in onboard talent shows to while away the hours. Because of its size and nature, the DY-750 class was often crewed by families, with those accommodations located on Deck 1 just behind the starship's also cramped bridge. Conversion of the class would be a long and extensive process, with a lot of trial and error. There had also been virtually no coverage of the entire event by the Federation News Service. And so when the call by Starfleet went out in late 2257, for private companies to take up the transport duties of the organization, everyone was surprised when Strategic Star Command showed up at Starfleet's doorstep. Utilizing the entire situation as a PR opportunity, the Willoughby twins warped in their entire fleet of 25 DY-750 class vessels directly into Sector 001, creating a positive media frenzy, the likes of which had not been seen since the launching of the Constitution class over a decade earlier. And as a result of this brilliant tactic, Strategic Star Command would become a hero organization itself to the Federation's public, being seen as the underdog which pulled through with flying colors in a desperate time of need. and so impressed with the class after an extensive inspection, Starfleet Command would sign Strategic Star Command to head up transport duties throughout the core of the Federation, which in turn would allow the organization to continue to expand their fleet of starships, eventually creating and constructing their own classes from the ground up. Strategic Star Command would eventually become the leading private contracted company of Starfleet and the Federation, and in fact it is still operating today, providing Federation citizens with reliable and affordable passage throughout its territory and beyond. And the DY-750 class, as a starting point to this shining company's reputation, has certainly earned this class its place in Starfleet history. Thank you for watching today's episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon. What do you think of the DY-750 class and the historical narrative that I've created here? Do you want to see more videos on made-up classes like this one? Well, leave your comments in the section below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel redesign its aging self? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.